The cheap wine, the color of watered-down blood, soaked into the worn linoleum floor. It spread in a sticky, accusing puddle around Lena's sensible black shoes. The glass lay in 1,000 glittering shards, a constellation of cruelty on the diner floor. Just moments before, it had been in his hand. Marcus. He stood over her, a mountain of cheap cologne and belligerent pride. His face was a mask of sneering satisfaction. "Look what you made me do," he slurred, his voice loud enough for every patron in the half-filled diner to hear. His words were a lie, wrapped in the cheap paper of blame. He hadn't spilled it. He had poured it, deliberately, slowly. He had poured the entire glass of Merlot onto the floor, his eyes locked on hers, a small, ugly smile playing on his lips. And now, he grabbed her arm. His fingers were thick and meaty, a legacy of a life spent bullying and intimidating. They dug into the soft flesh of her bicep, a bruising grip of ownership. "You're going to clean that up," he commanded. "On your knees, like a good little girl." The diner went silent. It wasn't a gradual quiet. It was a sudden, sharp intake of breath from a dozen lungs at once, followed by a vacuum. The clatter of cutlery stopped. The low hum of conversation died. The sizzle from the grill in the kitchen seemed to hold its breath. Everyone was watching. The chorus of bystanders, frozen in their vinyl booths, their faces a mixture of pity and fear. Lena didn't cry out. She didn't struggle. She simply stood there, his hand a manacle on her arm, her gaze fixed on the spreading puddle of wine. She felt a familiar, cold numbness creep over her. This was the world. This was the casual cruelty she had tried so hard to escape. Marcus smirked, feeding off the room's captive attention. This was power. This was control. Humiliating this quiet, fragile little waitress was the highlight of his miserable week. He was about to shove her down, to force her to her knees. But he never got the chance. He had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He saw a meek waitress in a cheap uniform. He didn't see the woman who had walked through fire and found a life on the other side. He saw a victim. He didn't see the wife of the one man in the city who had retired from a world of violence but had never, ever forgotten how to wield it. He had no idea that the quiet man in the corner booth, the man who had been reading a worn paperback for the last 2 hours, the man who had just stood up, was Julian the Ghost Volkov. And he had just broken the one rule Julian lived by. You do not touch his wife. All right, back to the story. The evening had started like any other Tuesday at the Silver Spoon Diner. It was a place caught in time, a relic of chrome and cracked red vinyl, smelling perpetually of coffee and frying bacon. It was a haven for the lonely, the tired, the people passing through. And for Lena, it was a sanctuary. Lena moved through the diner with a quiet grace that seemed out of place amidst the clatter and chaos. She was a whisper in a loud room. Her movements were economical and precise, born of years of practice. Refilling a coffee cup without spilling a drop, sliding a plate of fries onto a table without a sound, taking an order with a small, patient smile. She wasn't just a waitress. She was the diner's quiet, beating heart. The regulars knew her. They knew her kindness. Old Mr. Henderson, a widower who came in every night for a slice of apple pie, would often find his bill had been mysteriously paid. A young mother struggling with a crying baby would find Lena at her elbow with a warm cloth and a soft, reassuring word. This was her nature, to soothe, to mend. It was a stark contrast to the life she had left behind, a life of sirens and sterile white rooms, of pain and loss. Here, the problems were small. A burnt piece of toast, an overcooked egg. These were problems she could fix. Tonight, the diner was humming with its usual gentle rhythm. Lena was in her element, a small island of calm in the gentle storm of service. In the corner booth, the one with the best view of the entire room, sat her husband, Julian. To anyone else, he was just another customer. A tall, quiet man in a simple dark jacket, his dark hair lightly dusted with silver at the temples. He had the kind of stillness that made people look away, a self-contained presence that asked for nothing. He was reading a book, its spine broken and pages softened with use. He did this 2 or 3 times a week. He would come in, order a black coffee, and read for hours, watching Lena from over the top of his book. It was their silent ritual. He said it helped him unwind, but Lena knew the truth. He was watching over her. A guardian angel in a world he no longer ruled. She would catch his eye across the room, and he would give her a subtle nod, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. It was enough. It was everything. That quiet acknowledgement held the weight of their shared past, their hard-won peace. It was a promise. You are safe. I am here. The peace was shattered at precisely 7:45 post-meridian. The bell above the door chimed, not with its usual cheerful jingle, but with a harsh, demanding clang. Marcus strode in. He didn't walk. He swaggered. He was a man who took up too much space, his chest puffed out, his chin jutting forward. He wore a suit that was too tight and too shiny, a desperate attempt to project an authority he no longer officially possessed. Marcus was a former police detective, drummed out of the force for a corruption scandal that was quietly swept under the rug. Now he ran a small-time security consulting firm, a fancy title for a man who mostly bullied small business owners into buying alarm systems they didn't need. He considered places like the Silver Spoon to be his personal kingdom. He thrived on the deference of service workers. It was the only power he had left. Table, he barked, not looking at the please wait. To be seated sign. Lena approached him, her smile unwavering. Good evening, sir. A table for one? Marcus looked her up and down, a slow, dismissive appraisal that made her skin crawl. He saw her simple uniform, her tired eyes, her lack of makeup. He saw weakness. He saw a target. Yeah, for one, he sneered. And make it a good one, not some garbage table by the kitchen. Lena led him to a clean booth by the window. Is this all right, sir? He threw himself onto the vinyl seat, making it groan in protest. He didn't answer. He snatched the menu from her hand. Lena retreated, feeling the familiar prickle of anxiety. She had dealt with men like Marcus her whole life. Men who confused cruelty with strength. Men who needed to make others feel small to feel tall themselves. From his corner booth, Julian watched. He didn't look up from his book, but his eyes, calm and gray as a winter sea, missed nothing. He saw the way Marcus had looked at his wife. He saw the subtle stiffening of Lena's shoulders. A muscle in his jaw tightened, just once. The escalation began, as it always did, with small things, microaggressions designed to chip away at her composure. When Lena brought him a glass of water, he held it up to the light. Is this clean? He asked, his voice laced with accusation. Yes, sir. The glasses are washed and sanitized after every use. He took a sip and made a face. It's warm. Bring me another one. With ice this time. A lot of ice. Lena complied without a word. She returned with a glass brimming with ice, condensation dripping down its sides. He let it sit there, untouched, a monument to his petty power. Next, it was the order. He wanted the steak, but he had a dozen questions, each one more ridiculous than the last. Where does the beef come from? Is it grass-fed? What's the name of the cow? Lena answered patiently, professionally. It's a prime cut from a local supplier, sir. I'm told it's very good. You're told? He scoffed. You haven't even tried it? What kind of waitress are you? I'm a vegetarian, sir. He laughed, a short, barking sound. Figures. A weak stomach for a weak woman. The insult hung in the air between them. Lena's smile didn't falter, but the light in her eyes dimmed just a little. She simply nodded and wrote down his order. Steak, medium rare, fries on the side. Is that all? For now, he grumbled, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. The other patrons were starting to notice. The atmosphere in the diner was shifting. The comfortable, low-key buzz was being replaced by a tense, watchful silence whenever Marcus spoke. They were the chorus, unwilling spectators to a play they wished wasn't being performed. They felt a collective pity for Lena and a shared, unspoken contempt for the man in the booth. But no one said anything. This was the way of the world. You don't get involved. You keep your head down. Julian kept reading his book, page after page, but he wasn't seeing the words. He was listening. He was feeling the temperature of the room change. He was a master of reading environments, a skill honed in 1,000 backroom meetings where a single misplaced word could mean life or death. And this room was becoming dangerous. Not for him, but for his wife. And that was a danger he would not tolerate. His calm was a choice, a discipline he had cultivated for years. Beneath the surface, a cold, controlled anger was beginning to stir. It was an old friend, an engine he had long ago put in storage but had never fully dismantled. He knew how this story went. He had seen bullies like Marcus his entire life. They were cowards who fed on the fear and discomfort of others. They pushed and they pushed, testing the boundaries, searching for the breaking point. They needed a reaction. They needed to see their victim crumble. And Lena, with her infinite patience and quiet dignity, was denying him that satisfaction, which only made him angrier. The food arrived. Lena placed the plate in front of him with care. The steak was cooked to a perfect medium rare, a warm pink center just as he'd ordered. The fries were golden and crisp. Marcus stared at it for a long moment, then picked up his knife and cut a small piece. He chewed it with exaggerated slowness, his eyes narrowed in concentration, as if he were a world-renowned food critic. Finally, he swallowed. He pushed the plate away. "It's wrong," he declared. Lena's heart sank. "I'm sorry to hear that, sir. What's wrong with it?" "It's overcooked. I said medium rare. This is medium, at best. Are the cooks in your kitchen incompetent?" Lena looked at the steak. It was a perfect medium rare. Everyone in the diner who could see the plate knew it was a perfect medium rare. This wasn't about the food. It had never been about the food. "I can take it back to the kitchen and have them prepare another one for you, sir." "No," he snapped. "I've lost my appetite now, thanks to you and your terrible service. Just bring me a glass of your most expensive red wine." It was a test, another turn of the screw. "Of course, sir," Lena said, her voice a model of composure. She retrieved the bottle of wine, the one they kept for special occasions, and presented it to him. He waved it away. "Just pour it." She uncorked the bottle and poured a measure into a clean glass. She placed it on the table before him. He picked it up, swirled it, and sniffed it like a connoisseur. He took a tiny sip, his face contorted into a mask of disgust. "This is garbage," he spat. "Is this what you pass off as wine here? It tastes like vinegar." He looked down at the floor by her feet. Then he looked back at her, a cruel light dawning in his eyes. He had found it. He had found the perfect, ultimate act of humiliation. And that's when he slowly, deliberately, turned the glass upside down and poured the rich, dark liquid onto the floor. The sound of the wine splashing onto the linoleum was like a gunshot in the silent diner. It was an act of such calculated, pointless cruelty that it took everyone's breath away. "Look what you made me do," he said, his voice dripping with false innocence. And then came the final straw. The shattering of the glass, the grab, his fingers digging into her arm. "You're going to clean that up, on your knees, like a good little girl." The world stopped. Lena stood frozen, not by fear, but by a profound and weary sadness. She had built this quiet life, this peaceful little world, brick by brick, and here was a man trying to tear it all down, just because he could. She looked into his eyes and saw nothing there. No empathy, no remorse, just a hollow, echoing need to inflict pain. In that moment, she wasn't afraid of him. She pitied him, but pity wouldn't save her from the humiliation he was about to force upon her. And then, a sound. It was not a loud sound. It was the simple, unremarkable scrape of a wooden chair leg against a linoleum floor. But in the dead silence of the diner, it was a thunderclap. Every head turned. They turned toward the corner booth. The quiet man was standing up. Julian rose to his full height. He was taller than most people realized, his frame lean but powerful under his simple clothes. He placed his book carefully on the table, marking his page with a practiced, unhurried motion. He moved with a deliberation that was chilling. There was no rush, no panic, just a slow, unfolding certainty. The air in the room shifted. It was a physical change, as if the barometric pressure had suddenly dropped. The ambient fear in the room, which had been hovering around Lena, suddenly untethered itself and found a new target. It swarmed toward Marcus. Marcus, still clutching Lena's arm, felt it first as a cold prickle on the back of his neck. He turned, annoyed at the interruption. "What do you want?" he snapped at Julian. "Mind your own business." He saw a man, just a man, but others in the room saw something else. Old man Henderson, who had lived in this city his whole life, felt a jolt of recognition. He had seen that face before, years ago, in the newspapers. A younger face, harder, but the eyes were the same. The eyes of a man who could make a city hold its breath. At the counter, a man named Sal, a low-level bookie who used the diner as an unofficial office, went pale. He slid lower in his stool, trying to make himself invisible. He knew exactly who that was. He knew the stories. The ghost, a name whispered in fear and reverence. A man who had vanished years ago, presumed dead or gone forever, and he was here, in the Silver Spoon Diner. Julian took a single step forward. He didn't look at Marcus. His eyes were on Lena, and in them, she saw a universe of regret, of anger, and of absolute, unwavering love. Then, he spoke. His voice was not loud. It was quiet, calm, and carried the weight of absolute authority. It cut through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. Let her go. It was not a request. It was a command. It was a statement of fact, of how the world was about to be. Marcus, blinded by his own arrogance, was slow to understand. "Or what?" he scoffed, tightening his grip on Lena. "What are you going to do, old man?" Julian's gaze finally shifted from Lena to Marcus, and for the first time, Marcus felt a genuine tremor of fear. It was in the eyes. Julian's eyes were not angry. They were not hateful. They were empty. It was the flat, dispassionate gaze of a predator looking at something that had ceased to be a threat and had become a simple, uncomplicated problem to be solved. It was the look of a man who had made decisions that shaped the lives and deaths of hundreds, and he was now making a decision about one. To understand what happened next, you need to know who Julian Volkov was. You need to understand the world he came from and the promise he had made to leave it behind. Julian was not born into power. He had forged it in the brutal crucible of the city's underworld. He was an orphan, a street, a kid with nothing but a sharp mind and a capacity for cold, logical violence. He rose through the ranks of the Volkov syndicate, not by being the most ruthless, but by being the smartest. He understood people. He understood their fears, their greed, their loyalties. When he took over, he transformed the syndicate. He ran it like a corporation, not a street gang. His rule was built on two pillars: loyalty and fear. He was fiercely loyal to those who were loyal to him, protecting them and their families with an almost paternalistic devotion. But his enemies, and those who betrayed him, were met with a swift and terrifyingly creative form of justice. He earned the name the Ghost because he was rarely seen. He operated from the shadows, his influence a palpable but invisible force. His orders were carried out by his lieutenants, men who feared him, yes, but who also respected him with an almost religious fervor. He had a code. It was a brutal code, but it was a code nonetheless. No, civilians. No collateral damage. Disputes were handled internally, away from the eyes of the innocent world. He saw himself not as a criminal, but as a king, maintaining a harsh but stable order in a world the police couldn't control. For years, he was untouchable. He had a wife, Elena, a woman from the old country, and a son, Mikhail. They were his world. They were the one part of his life that was separate from the violence, a sanctuary of warmth and light. And that was the weakness his enemies finally exploited. A rival faction, led by a reckless young upstart who didn't believe in codes, decided to break the rules. They didn't come for Julian. They came for his family. A car bomb. It was meant for him, but he had switched cars at the last minute. Elena and Mikhail were not so lucky. Julian had arrived at the scene to find a scene of fire and twisted metal. A vision of hell that burned itself onto the back of his eyes forever. Something inside him broke that day. The king lost his kingdom, because the reason for the kingdom was gone. His vengeance was the stuff of legend. It was not a wild, passionate rampage. It was a cold, methodical, and complete dismantling of the entire rival faction. He didn't just eliminate them. He erased them. Their businesses, their families, their very names were wiped from the city's memory. When it was over, Julian Volkov, the ghost, simply vanished. He left the syndicate in the hands of his most trusted lieutenant, with a single, final order: let it be. He walked away with nothing but the ghosts of his wife and son. He wandered for months, a hollow man, waiting for the end, and then he met Lena. He had been injured in a back alley brawl, a meaningless fight he'd picked because he wanted to feel something, anything, other than the gnawing emptiness. He ended up in a hospital emergency room, bleeding from a knife wound in his side. Lena was his nurse. She was young, new, and had a gentleness about her that felt alien in his world, of sharp edges and brutal truths. She treated him not as a piece of meat on a gurney, but as a person. She cleaned his wound with a delicate touch. She spoke to him in a soft voice, asking him if he was in pain, if he needed anything. She saw the profound sadness in his eyes, the abyss of loss that he carried with him. She didn't see a monster. She saw a man who was drowning in grief, and she offered him a hand. He found himself talking to her. He who never spoke of his feelings, who never revealed a single crack in his armor, found himself telling her everything. He told her about Elena. He told her about Mikhail. He told her about the emptiness. And she listened. She didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. She just listened. And in her quiet presence, in her profound and simple kindness, he found the first glimmer of light he had seen in years. Lena, too, was an escapee from a world of pain. She had grown up in a home shattered by abuse and had spent her early adult years caring for a mother who was slowly consumed by illness. She understood loss. She understood what it meant to live with ghosts. They found solace in each other. They were two broken halves of a single soul who, when put together, found a way to be whole again. They fell in love. It was a quiet, gentle love, forged in the ashes of their past lives. When they decided to marry, they made a pact. No more ghosts, no more violence. They would build a new life, a quiet life, an anonymous life. Julian Volkov would die, and in his place would be Julian, the quiet man who loved a former nurse named Lena. They moved to a small, unassuming house in a quiet neighborhood. Lena took the job at the diner because she liked the simplicity of it, the honesty of a hard day's work. Julian started a small business, a high-end woodworking shop where he built beautiful, intricate furniture. His hands, which had once signed death warrants, now creating things of beauty and permanence. They were happy. It was a fragile happiness, a peace they guarded fiercely. But the past is never truly gone. It lives in the shadows. It waits. And tonight, in this cheap diner, a loud-mouthed bully named Marcus had just kicked down the door to their sanctuary and dragged the ghosts out into the light. This was the man standing before Marcus, a man who had forsaken an empire for a quiet life with the woman he loved, a man who had made a promise to her and to himself to never again become the man he once was. And Marcus, in his ignorance, was forcing him to break that promise. "I said, what are you going to do?" Marcus repeated, his voice a little less certain this time. He was still holding Lena's arm, using her as a shield. Julian took another slow, deliberate step forward. He was now only a few feet away. "I'm going to give you 3 seconds," Julian said, his voice still unnervingly calm, "to take your hand off my wife." Wife. The word hung in the air. It landed like a physical blow. Marcus's face went through a rapid series of expressions. Confusion. Disbelief. And then, the first real, chilling finger of doubt. This quiet, mousy waitress was married to this man? This man who stood before him with the stillness of a coiled snake? Something was wrong, terribly wrong. His bully's instinct, which was finely tuned to sniffing out weakness, was now screaming at him that he was facing the absolute opposite of weakness. But his pride was too great to back down now, not in front of the whole diner. 3, Julian said. His voice did not change in pitch or volume. It was as steady as a ticking clock, counting down to an inevitable conclusion. 2. Marcus's knuckles were white where he gripped Lena's arm. His mind was racing, trying to process the situation. Who was this guy? Some washed-up tough guy trying to play the hero? He was an ex-cop. He could handle himself. But his gut was telling him to run. Julian's eyes held him in place. 2 points of cold, hard gravity. One, the word, was barely a whisper. In that final second, Marcus made his decision. He let go. His hand sprang open as if he had touched a hot stove. He even took a small step back. Julian immediately moved to Lena's side, placing himself between her and Marcus. He gently took her arm, his touch infinitely tender, and inspected the red marks left by Marcus's fingers. He looked at her, his eyes asking a silent question. "Are you all right?" She gave him a tiny, shaky nod. Only then did he turn his full attention back to Marcus. The deconstruction began. "What is your name?" Julian asked. The question was so simple, so disarming, that Marcus was momentarily thrown. "What? Your name?" Julian repeated patiently. "I'd like to know the name of the man who felt it was necessary to put his hands on a woman in a public place." The way he framed it, the simple, factual statement of what had occurred, stripped Marcus of all his justifications. It laid his actions bare for everyone to see. He was a man who put his hands on a woman. "Marcus," he mumbled, his voice suddenly small. "Marcus Thorne." "Marcus Thorne," Julian repeated, as if committing the name to memory. "And what do you do for a living, Marcus Thorne?" "I'm a security consultant." He said it with a hint of his old bravado, trying to reclaim some of his lost authority. "A security consultant," Julian mused. "So you provide security. You protect people. Is that right?" "Yes," Marcus said, puffing his chest out slightly. "And yet, here you are," Julian continued, his voice dropping even lower. "In a public diner, being the source of insecurity, the source of the threat. Do you see the irony in that, Marcus?" Marcus didn't answer. He was starting to sweat. The hunter had become the hunted. The entire diner was his audience, but the applause he had craved had turned into a silent, suffocating judgment. "You came in here," Julian said, his voice a quiet, methodical narrative of the evening's events. "And you decided to make my wife's life difficult. You complained about the water. You complained about the food. You insulted her. And when all of that failed to give you the satisfaction you were looking for, you poured a glass of wine on the floor and demanded she kneel before you." He paused. "Tell me, Marcus, why? Why did you feel the need to do all that?" It was a genuine question, and it was the most terrifying question Marcus had ever been asked, because he didn't have an answer, not a real one. "Because I'm weak? Because my life is a disappointment? Because hurting people who can't fight back makes me feel powerful for a few fleeting seconds?" He couldn't say that, so he said nothing. "You have no answer," Julian stated. "Because there is no good answer. There is no justification for cruelty. It is the refuge of the weak, the currency of the coward." Every word was a nail being hammered into the coffin of Marcus's ego. Julian then turned, not away from Marcus, but to include the entire diner in the conversation. The impromptu trial had begun. "I'm sure many of you here tonight were uncomfortable with what you saw," he said, his voice now addressing the room. "You saw a man bullying a woman who was just trying to do her job, and you did nothing." He wasn't angry. He was stating a fact. Shamefaced, people looked down at their plates. "I don't blame you," Julian continued, his voice softening slightly. "It is human nature to avoid conflict, to not get involved, but you must understand that silence is a form of permission. Your silence told this man," he gestured to Marcus, "that his behavior was acceptable. He let that sink in. He was teaching them a lesson, as much as he was punishing Marcus. Then, he turned back to the man of the hour, and he did the last thing anyone expected. He turned to Lena. He took her hand in his. "Lena," he said softly, his voice for her alone, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "This man hurt you. He humiliated you. The world I came from has a very specific way of dealing with men like this, a way that is quick and permanent." A chill went through the room. They all knew what he meant. "But I left that world behind," he continued, his eyes locked on hers. "For you, for this life. So I will not do what the old me would have done. Instead, I am going to ask you a question. What do you want, Lena? What do you want to happen to him? This was it, the moment of agency. He was giving her back the power that Marcus had tried to strip away. He was making her not the victim, but the judge. All eyes were on Lena. Marcus stared at her, his face a mask of pleading terror. His fate was in the hands of the woman he had just tried to force to her knees. Lena looked at Marcus. She saw him for what he was, a pathetic, frightened man. She could have asked for anything: revenge, pain, ruin. But she was Lena, and her strength was not the same as theirs. She took a deep breath, and her voice, when she spoke, was clear and steady. I don't want him hurt, she said. A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the room. She paused, searching for the right words. I want him to understand. I want him to know what it feels like. To be small, to be helpless, to have to depend on the kindness of strangers. I want him to learn empathy. It was a sentence more profound and more devastating than any call for violence. Julian looked at his wife with an expression of immense pride. He had known she would say something like that. He nodded slowly. Empathy, he repeated softly. A fitting sentence. He then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a simple, old-fashioned flip phone. He dialed a single number. It was answered on the first ring. It's me, Julian said into the phone. He paused, listening. Yes, everything is fine, but we have a situation. I need you to do a few things for me. He began to speak, his voice low and calm, but every word was a precise surgical strike against Marcus Thorne's entire existence. There is a man named Marcus Thorne, former police detective, now runs a company called Thorne Security Solutions. I want you to start with his city contracts. Call Councilman Miller. Remind him of the favor he owes us. All of Thorne's contracts are to be terminated, effective immediately. Clause for moral turpitude. Marcus's face went ashen. His city contracts were his bread and butter. Next, Julian continued, I seem to recall there was a file on his departure from the force, an internal affairs investigation that was conveniently buried. Find it. Anonymously leak it to the press. I want his name and his picture on the front page of the morning paper, next to the word disgraced. Marcus began to tremble. His reputation was the only thing he had. And finally, Julian said, his eyes finding Marcus's again, the most important part. He's about to come into some legal trouble. He's going to need a very good lawyer. Arrange one for him. The best. And arrange for his sentence. No jail time. 1 year of mandatory full-time community service. I want him working at the downtown soup kitchen, the one on Skid Row. He will work the serving line. He will clean the floors. He will listen to the stories of the men and women he serves. He will learn their names. You will have someone check in on him, every day, to make sure he is learning his lesson. He paused. Yes, that's all. Thank you. He closed the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. It was done. In less than a minute, with a single phone call, he had utterly and completely annihilated Marcus Thorne's life. Not with a punch, not with a weapon, but with information, influence, and a deep understanding of what truly breaks a man like Marcus. He hadn't just taken his job. He had taken his pride, his reputation, his identity, and he had sentenced him to a year of forced empathy. It was a form of justice so perfect, so fitting, that it was far more terrifying than any simple physical punishment. As if on cue, 2 men who had been sitting at separate tables stood up. They were dressed in sharp, unassuming suits. They were Julian's lieutenants, his shepherds, who were never far away. They had been there the whole time, silent guardians. They moved toward Marcus, one on each side. They didn't touch him. They simply stood there, their presence an undeniable command. It's time to go, Marcus, one of them said, his voice polite but firm. Marcus looked at Julian, his eyes wide with a terror that was primal. He had picked a fight with a god, and had just been cast out of heaven and into a hell of his own making. He opened his mouth to speak, to beg, to apologize. But no words came out. He was broken. The 2 men gently but irresistibly escorted him out of the diner and into the night, toward the beginning of his new life. The door chimed softly as it closed behind them. And then, there was silence again. But this was a different kind of silence. It was a silence of awe, of respect. Slowly, the diner came back to life. The cook, a large man named Gus, emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. He walked over to Julian and Lena's table. "On the house," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Anything you want, for the rest of your lives." Julian simply nodded his thanks. Then, Old Man Henderson shuffled over. He looked at Lena, his old eyes wet with tears. "You are a good woman, Lena," he said. "You have a good husband." He patted Julian's shoulder, a gesture of profound respect. The chorus of bystanders was no longer silent. They were smiling. They were nodding their approval. They had witnessed not just a confrontation, but an act of true justice. Sal, the bookie at the counter, turned to the man next to him. "That's real power," he whispered, his voice filled with reverence. "Not the loudmouths and the bullies. Not the guys with the guns. It's the quiet ones. The ones who can change the world with a phone call. That's the ghost. I can't believe he's really here." Julian helped Lena clean up the broken glass. He knelt down himself, picking up the larger shards with his bare hands, his movements careful and precise. When they were done, he held Lena's hand. He looked around the diner, at the faces of the people watching them, and he delivered the final moral of the story. "Kindness is not a weakness," he said, his voice clear and strong, meant for everyone to hear. "It's a shield. It's the strongest shield there is. Some people are too blind, too broken, to see it. They mistake it for an invitation to be cruel." He looked down at Lena, his expression softening. "True strength isn't about how much pain you can inflict. It's about how much you can protect. It's knowing when to be gentle, and knowing when to build a wall of iron around the people you love." He squeezed her hand. "Let's go home." They walked out of the diner, leaving behind a room full of people who had been fundamentally changed by what they had seen. They had learned a lesson that night, that monsters and angels can look alike, that the quietest people can have the loudest impact, and that true justice is not about vengeance, but about balance. 3 months later, the Silver Spoon Diner was thriving. It had a new coat of paint, new vinyl on the booths, and a new energy. It was co-owned by a woman named Lena, who had bought it with her husband. Lena was different now. She still had her quiet grace, her innate kindness, but there was a new confidence in her eyes, a new firmness in her voice. She no longer walked like someone who was afraid of the world. She walked like someone who knew she was safe in it. She moved through her diner, with a sense of ownership and pride. The regulars still came, drawn by her warmth and the diner's new, brighter atmosphere. The place felt safe. It felt like a community. Julian was still there, in his corner booth, but he wasn't reading as much anymore. He was watching his wife, a genuine, open smile on his face. The ghosts in his eyes were finally starting to fade. He had found his peace. He had protected it. And miles away, in the dingiest part of the city, another story was playing out. In a noisy, crowded soup kitchen, a man was ladling stew into a bowl for a homeless woman. He was thinner, his expensive suit replaced by a simple apron. His face was etched with a weariness that went bone deep. But for the first time in his life, he was really looking at the person in front of him. He saw the lines on her face. He saw the pain in her eyes. "Here you go, Mary," he said, his voice soft. "Be careful, it's hot." The woman, Mary, looked up at him, surprised. "You remembered my name," she said. Marcus Thorne nodded. "Yes," he said. "I did." He watched her walk away to find a seat. His lesson was long. It was hard, but he was learning. Slowly, painfully, he was learning empathy. And in that, Lena had her justice, and Julian had kept his promise. The quiet life continued, built on a foundation of love, and guarded by the silent strength of a man who had traded a crown of fear for a kingdom of peace.